Young Turks, Anna Kasparian and Mark Thompson with you. He was kind enough to return to
Love being here.
Host the show today.
Yeah, no kindness associated with it. I look forward to it.
Yes, it's going to be great. It's a huge news day. Lots of stories to get to, including further corruption with the EPA's Scott Pruitt. I'll tell you what the latest breaking news story is on that. Absolutely infuriating when you consider the conflicts of interest and the blatant corruption at all levels of the federal government under the Trump administration, and they're messing with our environment. So it's something that I definitely want to dig into later in the first hour. And then in the second hour, we will cover the feud between Laura Ingraham and David Hogg. There has been some fallout by advertisers, and I absolutely love it because I detest Laura Ingraham, and she's getting exactly what she deserves.
Anyone of conscience should detest Laura Ingraham. So.
Yeah. Exactly. All right, well, let's get started with one of the biggest news stories of the day, and it has to do with even more people being fired from the federal government. All right, Veteran Affairs Secretary David Shulkin has been ousted from the Veterans Department, and part of the reason why is because there has been some fallout between him and Donald Trump. We'll get to those details in just a minute, but he has been replaced by Ronnie L. Jackson, an individual that you might have read about fairly recently because he was the person who gave an hour-long press conference in regard to Donald Trump's health and condition. Now, Trump said Wednesday that he was removing Shulkin and tapping Admiral Ronnie Jackson, the White House physician, as his replacement, ending weeks of uncertainty at the embattled agency. Now, Donald Trump decided to take to Twitter to broadcast this news to everyone, and he said, "I'm pleased to announce that I intend to nominate highly respected Admiral Ronnie L. Jackson, MD, as the new Secretary of Veterans Affairs."
At least he spelled veterans correctly.
Actually, that was not a bad tweet. You know, the proper words were capitalized. It was impressive. You know, low standards, but still impressive. All right. So he also said, in the interim, Honorary Robert Wilkie of the Department of Defense will serve as acting secretary. I am thankful for Dr. David Shulkin's service to our country and to our great veterans. Now, the big question here is how much of this decision had to do with the fact that there are certain members within Trump's administration that are pushing for the privatization of the VA. And it seems like that is one of the largest reasons. And also, why is it that Ronnie Jackson is stepping in now? How is he qualified to fill this position? And just to give you a little information about him, he served as a presidential physician since 2013, so meaning under the Obama administration. His experience in the White House goes back to the George W. Bush administration. He was also in charge of resuscitative medicine for the Trauma Response Unit during the Iraq War. He also praised Trump's health and has credited him for his good genes. So he was complimentary toward Trump, which could give you some idea as to why Trump would tap him to fill Secretary David Shulkin's role in the VA.
Yeah, that'll carry a long way with this administration, with this president, certainly. And the notion that they want to privatize the VA is the whole game, probably. And there's always the palace intrigue that goes on with the Trump administration, who's everybody in that White House is jockeying for position. There are leaks from everyone. There are conspiracies to oust certain people. That has been going on since the first hour, and it continues to go on. But what's happening at the VA is there's a big push to privatize it, and there's a big push to privatize a lot of things that are associated with everything in government, including the military. We've talked about that before. Eric Prince, who is connected to this White House, wants a privatization of many military endeavors. But anyway, on the VA, he was sort of viewed as the last bulwark, the thing that was going to be the last step in holding up the privatization of the VA. He was the one argument against privatizing it. So get him out because we want to privatize this whole organization. And that argument won the day here.
All right, so let's get into the infighting, the conflict, the drama, and how this all came about, because I think the inner workings of the administration are fascinating, especially in this case. Now, keep in mind, I want to preface everything by mentioning that there have been numerous members of Trump's administration who have raised eyebrows because of their very, I guess, generous spending of taxpayer money on things like travel, and they're still within the administration. They have not been fired. Tom Price was the only person who stepped down because of how much he had spent on travel. However, there are other members of Trump's administration who have spent money on ridiculous things, and they're still there. But it seems as though the excuses for getting rid of Shulkin had to do with the way that he had spent taxpayer money. Now, let's talk about the privatization issue. At the heart of the dispute between Shulkin and Trump appointees were changes to a program known as Choice that allows some veterans to seek private health care. Shulkin favored a modest expansion of the program that would still leave it up to the VA doctors whether patients can seek private care. Now, again, he was kind of the person who prevented the floodgates of privatization within the VA, and there were members of Trump's team that did not like that. So successes with the department, David Shulkin wrote in the New York Times, successes within the department have intensified the ambitions of people who want to put VA healthcare in the hands of the private sector. I believe differences in philosophy deserve robust debate, and solutions should be determined based on the merits of the arguments. The advocates for privatizing VA health services, however, reject this approach. He continues to write in his op-ed, and by the way, this was after he was fired. They saw me as an obstacle to privatization who had to be removed. That is because I am convinced that privatization is a political issue aimed at rewarding select people and companies with profits, even if it undermines care for veterans. Now let's get into the issue of spending taxpayer money. The Trump administration is trying to make it seem as though they got rid of him because of a misuse of funds. And again, there have been other members of the administration who have misused taxpayer money, but they're still there. So I see this as an excuse, even though I do agree that he shouldn't have spent the money in the way that was outlined here. Now, let's go to graphic 11. Feelings on Shulkin began to sour in February when the VA's Inspector General released a report on a trip to Europe over the summer that found Shulkin spent most of his time sightseeing rather than conducting official business, and improperly accepted tickets to a Wimbledon tennis match as a gift. Apparently, his wife also accompanied him on that trip. And after this report came out, Shulkin said, "I will 100% reimburse the government for those funds." And it didn't matter. They decided to get rid of him anyway because it wasn't about the misuse of taxpayer money. There are numerous members of Trump's administration who misuse taxpayer money. This was all about seeing him as an obstacle to privatizing the VA, and so they used that as an excuse to get rid of him.
Yeah, and it's funny when they, I mean, it really is laughable when they talk about some kind of honest debate on subjects. And Trump even says, well, I like to put two people who disagree on things in a room. I listen to the arguments and then I make a decision. No, that's not really the way it works. What you really do is you put two people who agree with you in a room, and then you decide how you're going to pursue whatever policy you've already decided you're going to pursue. And that was the case here. He was an obstacle to that. He wants that privatization. And look, he doesn't sound like the kind of guy who I would necessarily make my pal, because I do think that he went to great, shall we say, there was considerable excess in the way he took that vacation and he laid it on thick. Having said that, he is right. He's probably the guy who evaluated what's going on at the VA and felt the privatization was a bad idea. So in that sense, he's right, and it's a loss to the VA, Shulkin's departure. However, when you get to the guy who's going to replace him, you're talking about a guy who has no management experience.
That's right.
You got to understand the VA is a huge organization that's charged with tremendous responsibilities to help veterans who are in crisis often. I mean, there's a huge PTSD problem. There's a huge suicide problem. There's a huge problem we've heard about the veterans literally dying because they're waiting for treatments that they're not getting. So this is an administration that's besieged by problems, the VA. You need a management structure in there that is really going to make a difference. A guy who's never really been involved with management is not the choice to replace him, even though he's really good at complimenting the president.
That's exactly right. And my concern is that you privatize the VA and the care is not going to improve, it's actually going to get worse. Now, one of the issues with the VA was how severely underfunded it was. There wasn't enough attention and enough resources being pumped into the VA to ensure that we were doing right by our veterans. And there is no reason to believe that the private sector is going to do better with our veterans, considering the way that they're dealing with the American people in general. And David Shulkin made that point in his New York Times op-ed, and I completely agree with him on this. So graphic 10. He says the private sector, already struggling to provide adequate access to care in many communities, is ill-prepared to handle the number and complexity of patients that would come from closing or downsizing VA hospitals and clinics, particularly when it involves the mental health needs of people scarred by the horrors of war. And so I think that he had some legitimate concerns there, but as he also mentioned, there was no room for robust debate. Members of Trump's team have already made up their mind in regard to privatizing the VA, and it seems like they're headed in that direction.
They don't care about veterans. They just don't. They're all show and no go. It's all that other military. I want to have a military parade to celebrate our military. But when they talk about funding the military, they're not funding the VA. They're not funding PTSD and suicide problems and opiate abuse, that all of which afflicts the veterans in record numbers now. They're not talking about that. All they're talking about is ways to make money. So they dole out to their corporate pals and private businesses pieces of the VA, and they're going to slice it up and privatize it, and it'll all be about money, and the actual services provided to veterans will be lost.
It's pretty devastating. And if you look at the track record of this administration, you will see instances of, members of Trump's cabinet awarding these huge government contracts to their pals. And Betsy DeVos is the recent example. The Education Department just gave out a huge government contract to a debt collection agency that DeVos used to be invested in. So there's no reason to believe that this isn't an attempt to push for more sweetheart deals for their little cronies. All right, moving on to some other news. As we know, the White House is experiencing a number of shakeups, a number of individuals who are either being fired or pressured to resign. And it seems as though there are other members of Trump's administration that are now losing any sway or influence they have over the president. The most recent example that's been reported about is actually John Kelly, the White House chief of staff. Now, recent reports indicate that Kelly actually wasn't with the president last week when Trump abruptly decided to fire H.R. McMaster as national security advisor and replace him with John Bolton. Just two people were in the room for that decision, and those two people were Trump and Bolton. And so there is a lot of concern that John Kelly is not only losing his influence, but that John Kelly was one of the few people who kind of kept things under control in Trump's administration. And if he's now kind of pushing Kelly away, does that mean that there will be more chaos within the White House? Which is hard to believe, but yeah, I think that could be likely.
Yeah, I mean, I think it almost stands to reason that it would happen. Kelly was already besieged by this president who does all this stuff that is ridiculous. He talks first and asks questions later. He's on Twitter late at night and all of these things. Even the access to the president was being controlled by Kelly. He was trying to get a hold of all of these things. He was trying to bring some order to the general disorder that Trump had. It claims his operating style in the Oval Office. With the loss of Kelly, it's a little unclear as to what's going to happen, but certainly that general freewheeling style, and that's a generous way to put it with Trump, I would call it reckless, will have no checks on it whatsoever, or certainly limited checks on it.
Well, it seems like in this new, even scarier era of the Trump administration, Trump just wants to be completely untethered. He just wants to be able to do what he wants to do, carry out whatever ideas he has at any given moment without any form of checks and balances within his administration. And so if Kelly did serve as some sort of mitigating factor, obviously Trump isn't gonna love that. And there have been some White House staffers who have spoken to the media anonymously and mentioned that Trump doesn't even think that he necessarily needs a White House chief of staff if Kelly were to not be there anymore. So that's a scary idea because it's the way dictators think. They don't want anyone advising them, anyone controlling them, anyone telling them what to do, and Trump is kind of headed in that direction.
All the run up to the Trump presidency, you heard a lot about how he's a billionaire and how he runs these businesses and he'll be able to run this country. But the truth is that the Trump businesses were really run as a small kind of corner store operation. He didn't have a lot of people. There wasn't a big infrastructure from a personnel standpoint. It was really Trump and his family, and they ran the whole place. And that's sort of the way he wants to run the White House. Now he's got Bolton in there, who he likes because he sees him on Fox News talking tough, and he likes his mustache. And he brings him in there, or he doesn't like his mustache.
He doesn't like his mustache. But he finally decided to accept the mustache because he likes the tough talk.
That's it. Yeah. Okay, so the tough talk outweighs mustache. But anyway, whatever. Those are the wrong reasons to have somebody involved in your inner circle.
Right.
But he's still in touch with Lewandowski, and he's still in touch with Scaramucci.
Yes.
And he still has all these advisors who are connecting to him, even if they're not formally in his White House.
Okay, so I like that you mentioned those two names, Corey Lewandowski and also Anthony Scaramucci. Those are two people that Kelly did not want around the White House under any circumstances. Now there are reports that Trump is in communications with them. In fact, Corey Lewandowski just recently met with Trump in DC, and previously John Kelly had said that if Lewandowski were to visit the White House, he would have to personally escort him. And that didn't happen in this case. Trump met with Lewandowski without John Kelly. Also, last week when Trump spoke to President Vladimir Putin days before the US decided to expel dozens of Russian diplomats, Kelly was not on the call.
That's unprecedented, right?
Right, it is. So again, it shows you that Kelly's influence is tapering off. And also, aides say that Kelly mishandled Rob Porter's departure, first by revising a statement that praised the aide after news reports surfaced that he'd been accused of domestic violence, and then by giving reporters an inaccurate timeline of events leading up to Porter's dismissal. There are reports that Trump is still talking to Rob Porter, but it seems as though they are using Kelly's mishandling of that situation as a reason for why his influence is tapering off.
Well, that Rob Porter situation was bizarre, and it was mishandled by Kelly, but it seems like he might have been getting orders from Trump to try, because Porter was very important to Trump. He was a real kind of organizer of Trump's schedule, of Trump's appearances, all of these things as sort of secretary to the president. But they're clearly just hanging on Kelly, all of these different things setting him up for, his eventual departure.
And of course, what we're hearing from the White House is the same old, the calm before the storm. No, Kelly's awesome. No, we're not planning on getting rid of him. And then that should immediately be a warning sign that Kelly will be gone very soon. Obviously, that is my speculation, but if you look at what's happened with this administration previously, with the ouster of other officials, they usually say that that person is safe, they're not gonna get rid of that person, and then a couple of days later, that person is gone.
Yeah, look, the leaks and the journalism associated with this White House have been spot on. I mean, there really haven't been too many leaks or journalistic work associated with the White House that haven't been pretty accurate, and so that's the word out of the White House. And you can kind of read the tea leaves pretty easily on this for all the reasons that Anna's mentioning. You just see the way he's been diminished in terms of his access, in terms of his connection to the president, and you kind of just do the math. He's going to be gone.
Right. Well, Well, we got to take a quick break. When we come back, we will discuss the Scott Pruitt story that I teased at the beginning of the show. Make sure you tweet to us using the hashtag TYT Live. I do love reading your tweets during the break, so we will be right back with a couple of your comments in just a couple minutes.
When you're running for office and you're not, a typical candidate, you have to remember your why. Why are you doing it? I remember actually the day I put this down here. It would have been 2 years ago. And it seems like decades ago. And at that point, I was so lost. There's 30,000 people a year dying because they don't have health care. Because the CFOs that work in that field are sitting there figuring out ways to make optimum profit for their shareholders. This is a commodity. My daughter's life wasn't. Now that my eyes are open, I cannot and I will not close them again. I will never stop grieving for Shalyn. But I have learned how to take that grief and to put it into action.
Thank you.
We're gonna do this. We're gonna do this. We're in this together, girl. We all handle it differently. A lot of grieving parents that I've been in contact with, this are like really shocked that I'm able to do as much as I'm doing. For me, it's how can I not? I'm not going to allow my daughter to have died for nothing.
The American elections are designed to suppress the vote. They're not designed to get people fired up. They don't want people interested. We live in an oligarchy. None of this matters anyway. Your democracy has already been stolen from you. 90% of the people in America want some kind of gun regulation. We don't get it. 80% of people want a public option. We ain't never getting it. So legislation does not correlate to the citizenry anymore. We already live in an oligarchy. Capitalism is failing worldwide. Not one question about Brexit. Not one question about what to do when the banks fail here. Not one question, nothing. So it's the establishment with their head firmly in the sand, right? And just there needs to be a revolution in America because all of our institutions are completely corrupt, especially the news media, right? So we've got 6 companies running all the things that we hear and see. And this was a perfect example of how they're part of the problem. Again, Trump, not the problem. He's a symptom of the problem. This is all part of the problem. This is why half the country doesn't vote. Hillary Clinton's still not trying to go get those people to vote. What she's trying to do is trying to get more right-wingers to vote for her. Still not trying to talk to the
Hey guys, welcome back to TYT. Anna and Mark with you. A few TYT lives for you guys. Dr. Chaos MD, this is my favorite tweet, writes, when your soldiers are sent to war to benefit corporate oligarchic interests, i.e. profits, using taxpayer money, the logic follows that they would throw our money at private companies to care for our soldiers' health when they come back from war.
Wow. That's right.
I mean, they've already created this huge, profit incentive when it comes to invading other countries and going to war. Why wouldn't they do the same thing when it comes to providing health care for our soldiers?
Yeah. it's a money grab, plain and simple.
Pink Room Music, this is also one of my favorite tweets, writes the following: I'm a vet. I use a great VA hospital for all my medical. We will mobilize. This is war.
By the way, there are a lot of veterans who feel just that way.
Right.
They're very concerned about just that thing, which is that everything's fine. Like if you can get into the VA and get on a track, it's some of the best healthcare in the world. So it's by no means clear that everything's chaotic at the VA. It's just that there are leaks in that system, and it's underfunded in all of these ways that are associated with opioid abuse, and we described a few of them in the last segment. But yeah, it's going to take that. They're going to have to mobilize.
I mean, when you really think about it, and you look at U.S. foreign policy over the last several decades, what you've noticed is an escalation of war abroad, of US intervention abroad, without taking into account the psychological and physical toll that it's gonna have on our soldiers. So when you couple that with the underfunding of healthcare for our veterans, of course you're gonna have VA hospitals that don't have the resources necessary to take care of our soldiers. That is to be expected. And it's what you see with Republicans when it comes to so many different government programs. When it comes to public education, for instance, they'll go ahead and defund it. They'll take money out of public schools and fund vouchers for private schools. And then as these public schools start to struggle, they'll turn around and say, would you look at that? Government controlled programs don't work. They always fail. Well, yeah, anything would fail if you rip the funding away from it.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right.
Okay, let's move on to one of my favorite stories of the day, because it is something that enrages me and should be talked about by everyone. A new investigation by ABC News has discovered that Scott Pruitt, the head of our EPA, had been staying in a condo in Capitol Hill that was apparently co-owned by an energy lobbyist's wife. Yes, an energy lobbyist's wife. The chief of the EPA was staying in this condo, which means that it could potentially be a huge conflict, and it could potentially serve as a gift that is unlawful in this type of context. So let me give you more details. President Trump's EPA administrator, Scott Pruitt, occupied prime real estate in a townhouse near the US Capitol that is co-owned by the wife of a top energy lobbyist, Stephen J. Hart. Now, it was at the US Capitol, I apologize, not necessarily on Capitol Hill, but it was prime real estate, expensive real estate, and what you should be concerned about is that neither Scott Pruitt nor Stephen J. Hart are willing to disclose how much he was renting that condo for. He could have been staying there for free. He could have been paying market value. Again, we don't know because they will not disclose that information. Mr. Hart is the chairman and CEO of Williams & Jensen, a firm that reported more than $16 million in federal lobbying income in 2017 alone, and that's according to the Center for Responsive Politics. Just last year, an energy company, Chenery Energy Inc., reported paying Hart's firm $80,000. Now, what does this energy company want from the EPA? Something very specific. Hart's firm specifically lobbied on issues related to the export of liquefied natural gas, or LNG, approval of LNG exports and export facilities. Now, this energy company owned the only active liquid natural gas export plant in the United States at the time. Liquid natural gas exports was on the agenda for discussion during Pruitt's December 2017 trip to Morocco. So homeboy goes to Morocco, okay, and starts talking to government officials there, and he's like, that liquefied natural gas, you know you want it, it's so good, right? So why is he going to Morocco and encouraging them to, purchase liquefied natural gas from the United States? Well, one of the energy companies that hired this lobbying group essentially wanted that, and Pruitt was able to stay in this condo for who knows how much or how little.
Yeah, and it's funny, I saw that roll call called the Harts a lobbyist power couple. So they are known in Washington for being powerful representatives on Capitol Hill and at the White House for dirty energy. And we're seeing you could say, well, but there's nothing in what he's doing that would reflect that he is in bed with the energy companies. Only everything he's doing would suggest that he's in bed with the energy companies. We're seeing historic rollbacks of restrictions on chemical dumping, on Superfund funding. I mean, that's the cleaning up of toxic waste. And then to Anna's point, opening the doors to energy companies in this country in ways that we haven't seen in decades. I mean, even under the Bush administration, which was being spearheaded by Cheney and his henchmen associated with big oil, we didn't see this kind of thing. So this is just one more way that we see this close association. And you only have to go to the EPA website to see how he scrubbed the EPA website of any reference to climate change, to CO2 emissions being connected in any way to changing of the climate and general pollutants in the environment. This guy's a mess. I mean, you can take the P out of EPA. The guy's an absolute blight on the environment, and he's doing everything. I mean, he and his policies are a blight on the environment and this country. He's disgusting, and this is one more way that he's just sleeping with the serpents when he rents this place in Washington from two known lobbyists for energy.
It's crazy, and it's so incredibly brazen. I mean, the fact that he was staying in this condo, it's co-owned by these lobbyists that very clearly push for deregulation of energy and the oil and gas companies. It's just so clear, and again, it's not as though Pruitt hasn't already taken action that favors what these companies want, what these lobbyists pushed for. I mean, he went to Morocco late last year, specifically pushing for the US export of this liquefied natural gas. Now, the firm, meaning the lobbying firm, also lists on its website that it lobbies on other EPA policies like the Clean Air Act. And let me tell you something, they are not lobbying in favor of the Clean Air Act, obviously very much against it. Also, a career employee in the EPA's Office of Public Affairs has recently distributed 8 talking points to the regional staffers that offered suggestions on ways to talk with local communities and Native American tribes about how to adapt to extreme weather, rising seas, and other environmental challenges. Why is that relevant to this story? Well, it all kind of fits together like a puzzle piece. If you look at all of the policies that Pruitt has pushed for, it all has to do with climate change denial and also with deregulating any and all environmental protection measures that were taken in the previous administration. Now, let me tell you what some of those talking points are. Human activity impacts our changing climate in some manner. The ability to measure with precision the degree and extent of that impact and what to do about it are subject to continuing debate and dialogue. So the EPA is telling its employees to approach the topic of climate change in that way. That is a complete and utter lie. There is no disagreement. There is no continuing debate and dialogue regarding the human impact on climate change. The vast majority of climate scientists, the vast majority of scientists agree on this very issue.
Well, and also, I mean, these pollutants are being discharged in metric tons of the sort that affect lifespan. 7% of the world will actually have their lifespan limited. That is, they die way before their time, premature death as a result of air pollution. So we just know them to be pollutants. So I understand this climate change is a fun tug of war that this administration has gotten its talking points on, and so is the entire GOP. And you can sit there with your Uncle Bob and talk about it, and he'll tell you, well, there's scientists who disagree about climate change. Yeah, if I put you in the garage with the car running, it'll kill you. And that's what we're doing with this planet. We're just discharging more and more of these pollutants and rolling back restrictions on them. And our giant garage is filling up with these pollutants. So the EPA has really, I mean, honestly, it's almost as though you really can't call it the Environmental Protection Agency any longer.
You're right. That's a great point. It's now I mean, can you even call it environmental agency?
No, it's
environmental destruction agency.
It's what they and it's what they are. It's what they're charged to do, which is protect the environment.
Right.
There's so many of these toxified regions that require government funding and government attention and scientists leaning in to try to solve these issues of toxifying where we live. But what's happened here is you have someone leading the EPA who doesn't want any of those things. He wants to defund all of those things I've just mentioned, and then he wants to remove regulations on additional pollutants, both with air, water, and beyond. It impresses me because it seems like such a nonpartisan issue.
It shouldn't be a partisan issue.
Right.
It shouldn't be, but unfortunately, it is a partisan issue because of money and corporate interests that, again, they want to protect their bottom line. They have a profit motive. These gas companies, oil and coal companies, they want to protect any and all profits, any and all, money that they could possibly make, and it doesn't matter if it's going to happen, to our detriment or if it's going to negatively impact us. I mean, it negatively impacts all of us, but they don't care. All they're focusing on is short-term gains. Privatize those gains, socialize those losses. So.
Yeah, it's I mentioned the toxification of things. There's so much runoff into the Mississippi River. I think 40% of the toxins associated with runoff flow into the Mississippi River, to the point that there's a huge dead zone in the Gulf that's the size of New Jersey because of all of these toxins flowing into the Mississippi. So as we see our land, as we see the air and water all toxified, we need government in this way. There's no way private industry is going to cover us. There's no responsibility in private industry. As Anna says, they want to maximize their profits. That's all they're concerned with. And that really is their responsibility to their shareholders. But our responsibility, our government's responsibility to the people, is to protect us from so many of these industries that spew these toxins into the environment. And it's just not happening.
Exactly. We got to take one more break in this hour, so let's do that. And when we come back, Scott Walker got told by some judges. I'll give you the details on that and more.
I'm a registered nurse, I'm an ordained pastor, and I'm a mother of 2 teenagers. This is the district where Mike Brown was murdered. I only live 6 minutes from Ferguson. When the uprising happened, we found out how you don't have to have a name, you don't have to have the money. The problems that we have in our district are problems that we ourselves can fix.
We're in the top 3 in African American poverty. We're talking about mass incarceration. We're talking about, for African Americans, who are almost 50% of the district, to have a black congressman as long as they have had, and still have not made any significant gains. This is Cori Bush's time.
If we can get even just 15 more people across the country that will come in 2019 and perform, how much greater will we be? And then in 2 more years, 30. That's what I'm looking at, like it just continuing to grow.
All right, here we go for real. 1, 2, 3. Awesome.
The only way for a black woman to become the first black woman to ever go to Congress in the state of Missouri is for a black woman to run. I'm a fighter. I myself can de-escalate a person with a gun. And I'm not a police officer, so I wonder how come they can't do it. You can't buy me. There is no amount of money that can buy me because I walk with the people, I talk with the people, I'm on the ground with the people. I am the people that I serve.
Welcome back to TYT. Benjamin Carollo writes, sadly, hearing about more conflicts of interest within the White House is not surprising, especially sad to hear about it in the EPA, which has saved so many lives over the past few decades. Kevin Towill says, I guess EPA now stands for, and I think this is a better suggestion than what I mentioned, Environmental Pollution Agency, which is absolutely correct. And Jeff Waldorf says, always great to see Mark on TYT Live.
Oh, thanks, Jeff.
Yes. All right, I just got word of a story that I want to make sure that we talk about on the show. This was not pre-produced, but I do want to talk about it because it's going to impact a lot of students throughout the country. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that for the first time, more than half of the states in the US are requiring students to pay more in tuition for state schools and universities compared to what the government is contributing to their tuition. So these, again, are government funded, they're not private schools. However, historically, the government has stepped in and provided enough funding so their portion of the tuition actually outweighed what the students pay for their tuition. But again, for the first time, students are paying more in tuition to attend these schools compared to what the government is contributing. The State Higher Education Executive Officers Association looked into this, and what they found was that all of these states are using the funding in order to pay for their state Medicaid programs and also for state employees' retirement and healthcare services, but they have not increased taxes to account for all of these things. So the lawmakers refuse to pay the taxes or refuse to raise the taxes, and guess what happens? We have the emergence of regressive taxes, and in this case, tuition serves as a regressive tax. So to give you an example of how much this is impacting students, we're talking about averages here, okay? Prices are actually more expensive on a case-by-case basis, but the average tuition for a 4-year public college or university was about $6,572 in 2017, and that was up from $4,784 in 2008. So some might think, oh, it's not that big of a deal, but think about it. These are public colleges and universities. These are supposed to be the affordable option for kids who grew up in an underprivileged socioeconomic status.
Or just general families that have stresses, economic stresses, such that you want your kid to go to a state school. I mean, it's a public institution. A lot of people move to various states because the systems there in terms of higher education are better than they might be in the state that they're currently residing. It's a real problem, and this higher education and the fact that the costs keep escalating to the point that it's not accessible to people, it creates the divide. It creates the divide that we already see between the rich and the not rich, and I'll just call it that, but we all know what I'm saying. That gets wider and wider, and this is one more way it gets wider because the cost of public education, as Anna says, it's not look, private education isn't really accessible to any of us. I mean, the loans you have to take out to get into these schools in the private, the world of private education, they're insane. I mean, you can get into it, but you're going to graduate with a lot of debt. Here, when it's public education, that is to say, underwritten by those of us who live in the state, it should be accessible to all of us who live in the state. That's a real crisis.
It is a crisis because education, especially higher education, serves as a way for people to pull themselves out of poverty. And anyone on the right who makes these arguments about picking yourself up by the bootstraps or pulling yourself by the bootstraps, is that the statement?
Yeah, pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. Right.
I mean, that's such a disingenuous statement when you consider what they have done to affordable education for people. So I'll give you an example. Public spending per student actually declined 24% between 2008 and 2012. Appropriations began ticking back up in 2012, but their recovery has been uneven across the country, which is why you have about half of the states, not contributing enough. They're not even contributing an equal amount as the students. The students are contributing way more toward their tuition at these state schools, at these public state schools. In 2016, students in 24 states paid more than half of the cost of their education at public schools. In 2017, through a combination of budget cuts and tuition hikes, students in Kentucky, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Mississippi, I'm seeing a trend here, also passed the mark. So we can see which states prioritize their students when it comes to this issue. And student loan debt doesn't simply impact the lives of the students who carry that debt, it impacts our economy as a whole. These are people who are now tethered to a debt that they can never get rid of, even in the case of bankruptcy, and they're not able to participate in the economy the same way generations prior to them were able to. They're not able to purchase homes. They're not able to, develop their lives the way that their parents were able to do so. And it's just really sad to see this happen.
I don't mean to sound like, the super lib line here, but I'm just going to say it. The people who benefit from what Anna's talking about, which is that student loan debt, are Donald Trump and all of his buddies. I mean, again, sorry for what is the typical line, the problem is Donald Trump, but it is. Those student loan companies, they're the ones who are benefiting. And as we've seen, they're increasing their ability to tax those loans. They've changed the entire way that structure is working and the way that they can go after you. And they can be brutal, frankly, in going after you in these student loans. So those student loan companies, they're the ones who are benefiting from this. But to see it happening with public education, public higher education, it's heartbreaking, because that is the way that most of us should be able to get a pass into higher education.
Absolutely, and it's not just private lenders. Obviously, private lenders charge these high interest rates that keep these students in debt for a very long period of time, in some cases for the rest of their lives. But the federal government also gives out these student loans with lower interest rates, but the interest rates are considerably higher than what the banks received when they got that bailout money. So, I mean, it's just something to think about. What are we prioritizing in this country? It doesn't seem to be the future of the country. It doesn't seem to be helping to educate those who want to educate themselves, who want to be productive members of society. It seems as though actions are taken over and over again to make it less possible for people to create a great life for themselves, to create that American dream for themselves.
To give them access to education. Yeah. Shouldn't everyone have access to education? We're the richest country in the world, and we can't get access to education to all of the people who live here. It's just wrong.
Preach, yeah. All right, let's move on to Scott Walker. A little bit of good news when it comes to this story. Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker has been ordered by judges to fill 2 vacant legislative seats by calling for a special election. This is something that Walker did not want to do, and I'll give you the reasons in just a minute. But Walker did face a court-ordered deadline of noon today, Thursday, to call the special elections. He had asked an appeals court to delay the deadline by 8 days, to give the legislature time to return to Madison to rewrite state election law and make the initial court order moot. So he wanted lawmakers to change their election law so they wouldn't even have to have this special election. That's how badly he wanted to prevent this special election from happening. But judges got involved and said, no, you need to call a special election. It needs to happen immediately. Now, the special elections will be held on June 12th. And to give you some idea or some context into this story, it all began when 2 legislative districts, a state Senate district south of Green Bay and a state assembly north of Madison, have been vacant for months after the incumbents quit to take jobs in Walker's administration. So they move on to serve Walker, work for his administration, but those constituents that they left behind need to be represented, and so there should be a special election. Walker didn't want to have that election, and part of the reason why is because districts that have actually done very well for Trump are now starting to flip. And he doesn't like that. So let's move on to graphic 34. Walker has been reluctant to call the special elections after Democrats won another vacant seat in a heavily Republican district earlier this year. In that district, which covers several counties in Northwest Wisconsin, Trump won by 17 points in 2016, and that raised alarm bells among Republicans. In fact, Walker had tweeted about it at the time and said that Republicans should be pretty alarmed and concerned. And he made it clear he was alarmed and concerned, which is why he wanted to prevent this special election from happening. But it's going to happen whether he likes it or not. Walker complained by saying that Eric Holder, who was involved in these lawsuits, and other liberals from Washington, D.C. are using the situation in Wisconsin to raise money for their battles in the fall. Holder's group wants to win elections for governor with the hopes that they can use redistricting to permanently change the makeup of the US House of Representatives and put Nancy Pelosi back in charge as speaker. It's just funny, like the projection there is hilarious.
Right, because that's what I'd do, is what is the rest of that tweet, right? Because that's what he'd do.
Yeah.
Listen, those people deserve to be represented, and that he went to such extremes to delay this so that he could actually rewrite a law to prevent there from being this election speaks to how they'll deal off the bottom of the deck. You know, I was saying to Anna, because we were talking about it yesterday, because Anna kind of, I thought, made a good point that we get angry with them, and I'm talking about the right, and because they're so brazen, they're so naked in the way they go after the redistricting, and they take control of government, and they don't even take they're no stock is the word I'm looking for. They don't take stock of the other side, so that there can be some kind of compromise that can address all parties, or at least listen to all parties. None of that is done, and in this case, they are redistricting, and they want to actually change legislation to avoid an election. So what we were talking about, just to finish my thought, is Anna was saying, I'm sick of this. We play nice with them. We look for compromise. We try to play by the rules, and they go outside the bounds of the rules. In this case, they want to erase the special election altogether. And this is dealing off the bottom of the deck. That's what Scott Walker is doing.
That's exactly right. And to give you even more context, those two seats have been vacant since December of 2017. We're now quickly approaching April of 2018. And so part of Walker's argument was, well, that special election is a waste of taxpayer money because we're going to call the election, and then soon enough, those two individuals will have to run for re-election. And why would we hold the election now? Well, I mean, I guess maybe if the seats became vacant today, that would be an okay argument, but I still wouldn't buy it. These seats have been vacant since last year, since December of 2017. He purposely has been, pushing this further down the road in an effort to prevent the possibility of a Democrat getting elected. And by the way, or two Democrats getting elected. And by the way, even if, best case scenario for the left, I guess, two Democrats do get elected, in the state, Republicans still control the legislature.
Yeah.
They would still control the legislature. It's just that he's too afraid to see what would happen in these elections.
No, he doesn't want to give up any ground. I mean, the good news you could say for those on the left is, if he's that worried in a state and a district that is so red about losing these seats, it's a good sign for the left. It means that the state is shifting, and that may be.
Exactly. All right, I want to give a huge amount of love to teachers throughout the country, because we are seeing an uprising of educators that is incredibly effective and encouraging. So let's go to Oklahoma, where teachers are planning to strike very soon. Teachers in the state of Oklahoma are planning a walkout on April 2nd in response to the low amount of money that they're paid in their salaries and the fact that many of them haven't received raises in as long as a decade. Now, the Oklahoma Education Association called for teachers to walk out of their classrooms on April 2nd, and it'll actually be the day after the state legislature is required to pass an education budget. Now, the teachers are calling for a $10,000 raise for teachers over 3 years, as well as a $200 million increase in funding for education, which has been cut by 28.2% since 2008. Now, as I mentioned, there have been teachers working in Oklahoma for as long as 10 years, and they haven't received a single raise in that period of time, which is ludicrous. Now, the average high school teacher in Oklahoma makes about $42,460, which ranks 50th in the nation for teacher salaries. Now, what are lawmakers in Oklahoma planning to do when they pass legislation in response to all of this? Well, the Oklahoma House this week passed a package that would give teachers at least a $5,000 raise and raise taxes in the state for the first time since 1990. It hasn't become law yet, and it doesn't include an increase in school funding. Now, I think it's important to show you the face of this movement, some of the faces in this movement. Lindsay Stewart is one of these teachers, and her story really broke my heart. Vice News spoke to her, and she shared what her experience has been like being an educator in Oklahoma. Take a look.
I think the plan to walk out on April 2nd is a necessary, I don't want to call it a necessary evil.
Lindsay Stewart is a teacher at Bartlesville High School, but still has to work 2 jobs to make ends meet. This year, she will make $34,929 teaching, a salary that hasn't increased since she started teaching 10 years ago.
My life as a teacher is not just a teacher. I have to work a second job, so I'm a teacher and a photographer. So my mornings start around 5 a.m. and then they end around 8 p.m. with picking up my daughter from gymnastics, and then 10 p.m. with all the editing that I have to do for photography. So in between then, I teach for 7 hours, and then I take my kids to their extracurricular activities, and then do my photo sessions, and then do my editing for my clients for photography. So my life as a teacher is very hectic.
So Lindsay wakes up, and from the moment she wakes up to the moment she goes to sleep, she is working and working hard to support herself and her daughter. And in this next video, she talks about how she wants her daughter to look at her and be proud, and she doesn't feel like that's the case because of the situation she's in, struggling and working 2 jobs. Take a look.
My daughter is very active in gymnastics and is an advanced gymnast. This is what her dream is, and so my job as her parent is to make sure that I do everything possible to nourish that dream. And I'm like every other teacher in the state, we're just trying to pay our bills. I don't think any teacher goes into the profession and thinks, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be a millionaire. But we also don't think that we're gonna be that close to poverty. I wanna be proud that I'm a teacher, and I want my own children to be proud of me. So I will continue to fight because I know I'm worth more, and I know my students are worth more.
That's a heartbreaking video.
It is heartbreaking, and we have to pay these teachers a living wage. And hearing about these teachers who have to supplement supplies for their students with monies out of their own pockets, that goes on in cities and municipalities across the country. It's just wrong. And then when you look at what's happening in Oklahoma, that's disgusting. And they haven't had a pay raise in, what did you say?
In a decade, in 10 years, in 10 years. And all they've experienced is, cuts to funding for their school districts. And what I love is that they're standing up, that they're rising up and they're fighting, and that they're not going to be happy with the $5,000 raise proposal by lawmakers in their state. They want more. They want funding for their schools. And there have been teachers in other states that have also stood up and have won their battles successfully. West Virginia is another example.
Yeah.
Teachers in West Virginia were not having it. They were tired of it, and so they did the strikes and did what was necessary to get the funding that they needed, to get the raises that they needed to do their jobs effectively. So we're talking about the future of the country. We're talking about the nation's youth and making sure that we are competitive globally. And the only way to do that is to make sure that we provide quality education for our young people. And we're not doing that. We're not prioritizing that. We're funding military contractors, private contractors, wasting all of this money to pad their pockets. But when are we actually going to use taxpayer money to take care of our own? When are we going to use taxpayer money to not benefit corporations, but benefit our kids and make sure that they have a quality education? This is maddening. And the idea that someone would work full time as an educator and then have to take up a second job as a photographer just to provide for herself and her family is uncalled for. We need to do something to change this, and I love that the teachers are fighting back. They have my full support.
Bravo.
Yeah. All right, I guess we'll go to break. Let's go to break, and then when we come back, second hour stories that you don't want to miss. We'll see you in just a minute.
The whole argument is so faulty, right? They're saying it's a safety issue for people that are using the bathroom, right? One, portraying transgender people as predators, which is already faulty in itself and dangerous in itself. And the truth of the matter is the people that are really at risk in bathrooms are transgender people. All right. I mean, when you look at just yesterday, there was a transgender woman who was killed in New York, bullied and killed. All right, those are the people that are at risk. And these are the same groups of people who say that they are pro-life. And you cannot be pro-life if you are sentencing these used bathrooms where they can face dangerous situations, face deaths, and already contribute to them feeling not accepted in their own skin, in their hometowns, in their schools where they should feel the most accepted. I mean, transgender people have just unbelievable statistics of teen suicide, and you are contributing to that number.
How can you fight these big monopolies and win these policies over?
The best reason to believe that we can do it now is that we've done it before. If you go back and we look at it in Saving Capitalism, if you go back to the Gilded Age, the robber barons of the late 1880s, 1890s, conditions were terrible, terrible, and people couldn't see a way out of it. Well, we had a progressive era that started in 1900. Teddy Roosevelt, a very wealthy, a very wealthy guy, sort of saw that this was a danger, not just to the economic long-term future of America, but also to the democracy of America. And we had a series of rules that changed over time: the 40-hour work week, the no child labor law, childs weren't allowed to exploit children in working conditions, things like that that sort of changed. Slowly, one rule at a time, over say a period of from 1900 to about 1914, and again picked up, in the kind of, after the Great Depression in the 1930 or so. So the only thing that I can say that gives me hope, or one of the things that I say that gives me hope, is that we've done it before, that we've been through very dark periods in American history when capitalism has essentially gone off the rails, and we've gotten that capitalism, that economic system, whatever you want to call it, back on the rails before. It's been this bad before, and we fixed it. And we've faced down strongman dictator types in America, and we've gotten rid of them and toyed with this kind of extremist leadership before, and we've gone to genuine positive social change every time in America. My hope is we do it again. We're at an incredibly dangerous time in America. Everybody knows it. This sense of Donald Trump being a kind of unstable strongman dictator in the kind of model of something you might see in Latin America in previous years, or in dangerous, what we associate with dangerous parts across the globe, is real. This is that unnormal. He's that unstable. He's not a normal conservative, principled conservative, which I think not,
Hey guys, welcome back to TYT. Grace Baldridge joins us. I'm super excited.
I know, it's been a while. I'm so excited to join you guys. Thanks for having me.
It has been a while. So Grace is actually a new mother. She has a puppy named Bean.
Yeah,
right?
Jelly Bean, yes, but Bean for short.
So cute.
So I've been just training this puppy and trying to devote a lot of time to that.
It's a lot of work. I'm not gonna lie.
You've been through it. I regularly come to you with just questions like, "Is this normal?" Because Charlie is closer to the size of Jelly Bean.
Yes, yes.
So is there torn up mail and socks and stuff like that everywhere?
A couple books have
really?
seen their time come to
got
pass.
really lucky with Charlie. He didn't ever chew anything up. With one exception, one time when John was watching him, he chewed up some cables, which made me feel. But he's never done that at our home. But yeah, he had separation anxiety. You're kind of going through that, which is tough. It's really hard.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, it's great to have you.
Thank you.
And we're going to do a lot of stories together, including reading some tweets and responding to them. So let's do that. Dances With has one of my favorite tweets. It says, 1-800-WAH-WAH-Walker. Poor thing is required to have an election as if we're not already an oligarchy. The struggle is real. Right. Yeah, I mean, I love the wah-wah thing. Jay says, the GOP seems to go out of their way to be anti-voting. I wouldn't be shocked if their 2018-2020 party slogan will be, for freedom from democracy, vote Republican. And also—
yeah, those pesky elections, they really just get in the way of stuff.
I know, right? And finally, Peter Hamby in the YouTube super chat writes, in Scott Pruitt's EPA, it's the Emissions Protection Agency.
Oh.
I like all the suggestions for what it really means now. All right, you guys ready to talk about Laura Ingraham?
Oh,
sure.
Are we ever?
As ready as I'll ever be.
This is a good story. This is a good story. Okay. Conservatives have aggressively attacked students from Parkland, Florida, who have been calling for and demanding changes to our gun laws. And David Hogg has dealt with quite a bit of that criticism and those attacks. Now, I want to remind you all that David Hogg is 17 years old and literally experienced his peers getting murdered in front of his eyes because of gun violence. And so naturally, he would want to speak out about the issue and push for real changes. People like Laura Ingraham from Fox News are not fans. They don't like that and have taken to social media to attack the likes of David Hogg. A recent example would be a tweet that Laura Ingraham put out in regard to David Hogg not getting accepted at some universities. She wrote, David Hogg rejected by 4 colleges to which he applied and whines about it, dinged by UCLA with a 4.1 GPA, totally predictable given acceptance rates. Now, she tweeted that in response to David Hogg's interview on TMZ. I'm gonna show you that interview now so you can decide whether or not he was whining about not getting accepted at these colleges. Take a look.
It's not been too great for me and some of the other members of the movement like Ryan Deitch. We got rejected from Cal State, we got rejected from UCLA. And I got rejected from UCLA and UCSD. So it's been kind of annoying having to deal with that and everything else that's been going on. But at this point, I was, we're changing the world. We're too busy. Right now, it's too hard to focus on that.
Are you a little surprised that schools haven't solicited you? Because beyond having a 4.2 grade point average, you are doing important things.
I'm not surprised at all, in all honesty. I think there's a lot of amazing people that don't get into college, not only that do things like I do, but because their voices just aren't heard in the tsunami of people that apply every year to colleges in such an economic, in such a really impacted school system here that we have in America, where people have to go into massive amounts of debt just to go to college and get an education. I think it's really sad, but it's the truth.
Right on.
I mean, let me open it up to the panel because maybe I'm not hearing things correctly. Did that sound like whining about not getting into the colleges that he applied to? By the way, he did get into other colleges, including Florida Atlantic University, California Polytechnic State University, and California State University San Marcos. By the way, he has a 4.2 GPA and an SAT score of 1270. Very smart guy, is gonna have a very bright future ahead of him. And again, I personally didn't hear any whining, but tell me what you guys think.
I didn't hear any whining.
No, of course not. He wasn't whining at all. In fact, even when it was suggested, hey, don't you think that the likelihood of schools coming forward and soliciting you is increased because of you become sort of the spokesman or one of the spokespeople for this movement? He said, no, there are a bunch of extraordinary people out there, and I'm pleased that you might see me that way, but that's not, I'm really just in a sea of extraordinary people. And then he pointed to the problem in higher education, which I thought, is again what a great mind he is. He's clearly a future leader.
Yeah, he pointed out that there's a major problem in this country right now with higher education to begin with, which just shows his sort of his awareness to what's going on beyond just the issue that he has become the spokesperson for. Which I think it's worth reminding everyone he didn't. No, these kids didn't ask to be put in this position. Right. And it gets so frustrating when you see on Twitter like, are you this or are you that? Like these are kids that survived a massacre.
Exactly,
okay?
exactly. These are kids who went through something so incredibly traumatic, and they're victims, and they're fighting for change so other people don't experience what they just experienced. And it's amazing to me to see people on the right, Photoshop images of them in order to smear them.
Yeah, that Constitution, that was disgusting when they showed
Emma Gonzalez
ripping up the Constitution.
Right, which of course she didn't do, that was Photoshopped. And then you have people like Laura Ingraham who, I mean, what are you 12? She's an adult who's going after this guy, this kid, and making it seem as though, he's some loser who didn't get into these schools and that he's whining about it.
He's got a 4.2 GPA.
He's
brilliant.
I know.
The kid is brilliant.
Yeah, and if anyone in this story is known for whining, it's Laura Ingraham and people who are in line with her and her form of thinking. Because anyone who happens to go against anything they believe in regard to guns makes them lose it and go on these rants like lunatics. So anyway, by the way, there are members of the right, to their credit, who criticized Laura Ingraham and the way that she handled that. So I want to give them credit because it's not everyone on the right. And I want to be clear that, unfortunately what we're seeing is the extreme part of the right kind of like represent everyone. And I don't think that that's a fair depiction of everyone who identifies as a Republican. So I want to be clear about that. Laura Ingraham is just crazy and an extremist, especially when it comes to this particular issue. Now, David Hogg fought back. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Following Laura Ingraham's criticisms of David Hogg not getting into every college that he applied to, David Hogg responded by listing all of the people or all of the companies that advertise on Laura Ingraham's Fox show. So on that list, you'll see Sleep Number, ATT, Nutrish, which I learned is a dog food brand, Allstate and Esurance, Bayer, Rocket Mortgage. And then he later tweeted to each individual company and asked them, is Laura Ingraham really the type of person you support? Especially after she attacked me on Twitter. And guess what? A bunch of companies started questioning their support for Laura Ingraham and their advertisements on her show. And they are either pulling out or considering pulling out. We have Nestle, TripAdvisor, Expedia, Wayfair, Joseph A. Banks, which is a suit store, Nutrish. Nutrish actually tweeted and said, we're in the process of removing our ads from Laura Ingraham's program.
And they said, we're so happy that Anna Kasparian now knows what we are.
Yeah, so I mean, people are taking action, and it's amazing how influential these kids are. They're so incredibly influential and
following this action, Laura has issued an apology.
Yes, so let's get to that apology right now. So here are some of her comments in response to the heat that she's receiving. Now, she says, any student would be proud of a 4.2 GPA, including David Hogg. On reflection, in the spirit of Holy Week,
spare me.
I apologize for any upset or hurt my tweet caused him or any of the brave victims of Parkland. For the record, I believe my show was the first to feature David immediately after that horrific shooting, and even noted how poised he was given the tragedy. As always, he's welcome to return to the show anytime for a productive discussion.
You know what's interesting about that is that I'm sure that they did have him on the show. Perhaps it was his first appearance. I don't know, but let's say that we believe her on that note.
Yeah.
It was before they knew the movement that was coming. And now that there has been this reckoning and this movement from these teenagers that survived this massacre, they're scared, and then they're acting as in an incredibly petty way. I just kept thinking, why are you punching down here? Like, come on, you have to have some respect. And then also, as a Christian, in the spirit of Holy Week, are you out of your mind? How about in the spirit of human decency?
Absolutely.
That's not what a Holy Week is about. Like, what the hell?
It was a self-serving tweet, and that's why she mentions Holy Week, because it reminds everybody, I'm holy. I'll remind you, just to your point, Grace, quickly, they mention and attack these kids personally because there is no argument against what the kids are going for, which is responsible gun legislation. So they attack the kids because you can't attack the argument itself. But this tweet, an apology, is really a non-apology. It's one of those, I apologize if I offended anyone with my comments. And then she mentions Holy Week, and then she mentions that she had David on and was the first one. And as Grace says, it was just a rush to book this kid who'd been at the Parkland massacre before this entire movement was birthed. So I give her no credit for the tweet at all. It seemed incredibly self-serving.
She's sort of going down a checklist of apologies to try and keep advertisers is what it is. And I think that fortunately we can recognize just sort of how tone deaf this entire thing was.
Right, absolutely. And I want this to serve as a learning experience for everyone. And what I mean by that is it's okay to disagree about policy, right? It's okay to come from a completely different ideological standpoint and not agree with everything that the victims want. But with that said, there used to be a time, it feels like centuries ago at this point, where people could disagree with one another on policy in a civilized way, in a civil way. And right now, we're not seeing that at all. One of the issues with this Trump era is that any and all civility has been thrown out the window. And it doesn't matter who's involved in the discussion. It doesn't matter if it's minors. It doesn't matter if they're victims. It doesn't matter if they're disadvantaged or disenfranchised. There's just this level of toxicity in every political discussion and debate that needs to be dealt with, that really needs to change. And I don't know if that's gonna happen, but I do think that this particular story could serve as a learning experience for everyone.
Well, it can serve as a learning experience also from the standpoint of pressure you can bring to bear when people get way out of bounds. This president began all that bullying, making fun of the way people look, little Marco, I hate Marco Rubio, but the little Marco thing, and just the making fun of people's appearance. I mean, everyone he was making fun of during the debates, I hated, but it doesn't make it right to make fun of their appearance, attack them on the issues. But again, Trump doesn't know the issues, so he went after people personally, which is kind of what's happening here. And the last thing about this apology I will say is, this apology means nothing given the fact that there is essentially a boycott gun to her head, if you'll pardon the use of the parallel in this instance. I mean, she's seeing the boycott of her show by advertisers, and she's going, oh my God, I've got to issue the apology. So the apology immediately is counterfeited, it's bankrupt. And then when you actually look at the apology from all the ways that we've kind of broken it down, it's even more bankrupt. So Laura Ingraham is as vile today as she was yesterday.
We got to take a quick break. Let's do that. When we come back, the state of Vermont, you can add it to the list of states that have pushed for and successfully passed or soon will pass gun legislation. I'll tell you what the proposals are when we come back.
I started waitressing when the financial crisis hit because we were about to lose our home. You're trying to make a $300 student loan bill here and your foreclosure installment here. You just do your best to survive. Americans aren't asking for a lot. They're just asking to get by. And they're just asking for politicians to be brave enough to help them get by.
The Bronx does not need to be the poorest county in the USA. And what is it going to take? It's going to take people like you. Fearless.
Part of me is like trying to brace myself because people keep telling me they're going to try to make sure that you never show your face in your community again. When someone looks at me, the bias would be to not take me seriously until I open my mouth.
I'm running to represent the Bronx. I'm a third-generation Bronxite. I'm a Latina. I am a Boricua. I am a descendant of Taino Indians. I am a descendant of African slaves. I am proud to be an American. But we have to rise to that promise.
This race is about people versus money. We've got people, they've got money. I'm running in this district because we've been ignored for far too long. Because the powers that be have forgotten who lives here. Because we have a median income of $47,000. We're half immigrant. We're 70% people of color, and we are not being heard. And I'm running so that people can be heard.
Welcome back to TYT. A few TYT lives for you before we get started with the next story. Carlos Danger writes the following. This is like Sean Hannity all over again. Wait, I upset the sponsors? I'm sorry. Please don't take the money out. Right? Yeah. Grace was saying something.
I was just saying that when we were during the break, I brought up Sean Hannity as an example.
Yeah, so you guys
just know each other so well.
Snook Kid 999 says on YouTube super chat, Vermont is also rolling out legal cannabis this summer. That was in all caps, by the way. Much love from the 802, Dominic. Yes. Okay,
that's awesome.
All right, so we do have a story out of Vermont that makes me incredibly happy and it should make everyone hopeful, including the students that are fighting hard for gun control. The state of Vermont has been notorious for pro-gun legislation. However, it is a testament to how incredibly persuasive and powerful the Parkland, Florida students are, because the state has just advanced significant gun control measures. In fact, the governor of the state, Phil Scott, who has an A rating from the NRA, has also decided and agreed that gun control measures need to be passed in the state of Vermont. Now, Vermont's Republican Governor Phil Scott, who campaigned in part by pledging to protect gun rights, is preparing to sign a package of gun control measures overwhelmingly passed in the state's General Assembly. Now, here is what these gun measures will do. It will raise the age for purchasing a gun to 21, also ban the sale of bump stocks, impose universal background checks for all gun purchases. This includes gun purchases between private individuals, and partially ban high-capacity magazines. Again, Vermont is known as a very pro-gun state. In fact, if you look at the arguments that Bernie Sanders has made in regard to lawsuits filed against gun manufacturers, you see that he's not necessarily as progressive on that very issue, and it's because he comes from such a pro-gun state where hunting is a staple. It's something that the people living there really want to protect. Now, pro-gun groups routinely listed Vermont as one of the friendlier states for gun owners based on their lack of gun laws, and the National Rifle Association gave the governor a 93% rating during his 2016 campaign. But here's what Governor Scott had recently decided. Well, on February 15th, that was one day after the Parkland shooting, police arrested an 18-year-old named Jack Sawyer in Vermont for plotting a mass school shooting of his own. And that close call reportedly shook Governor Scott. He was quoted as saying, "If we are at a point when we put our kids on a bus and send them to school without being able to guarantee their safety, who are we? As a result, I've been asking myself, are we doing everything we can to protect our kids?" And it seems as though he's willing to put his own biases aside to do what's right for the people of Vermont.
This is really encouraging and surprising coming from Vermont, but I think it comes down to the governor recognizing that the buck stops with him. And this very close encounter so soon on the heels of Parkland really did shake him up, and it's nice to see that that bled over, that spilled over into sensible gun reform, and that they're proposing that in a really meaningful way. And I think when you look at what is going to be on this bill, I mean, this is so reasonable. This really makes me very hopeful for other states that maybe feel like it could be an uphill battle, that this is something that that will protect responsible gun owners, that doesn't affect them at all, and will protect children. So I was very encouraged to read this.
Yeah, it's incremental, you know. You're right. I think Grace is right when she talks about the fact that it's encouraging. If you want the elimination of assault rifles, then this doesn't really address that. And I do want the elimination of assault rifles. And I don't understand why these weapons of war are in people's hands. But back to this story in Vermont, it is good news because they are so reluctant to touch this issue. It is a third rail issue. As Anna says, even Bernie Sanders doesn't really get involved in this in any big way. So to see them be proactive from a governor who's avoided it in the past, it is good news. And yeah, it doesn't go as far as we'd like to see eventually. It doesn't, but boy, it goes a lot farther than you ever thought it would go in Vermont.
Right, and for me, by the way, Mark, I completely agree with you that, you know, the measures aren't really that big of a deal if you look at the big picture, right? But the reason why I think this is encouraging is because think about what happened after the Las Vegas shooting, which was the largest mass shooting in modern US history, right? We have so many people gunned down at a music festival. It impacts people who are at a country music festival, right? So they're not necessarily people who are like ultra libs, and even experiencing that themselves, you still have a huge portion of this country that doesn't want any gun control at all. We couldn't even get bump stocks banned after that shooting. And honestly, after that happened, I had personally, internally, I didn't vocalize this, given up. I had given up. I had no faith in our lawmakers. I had no faith, sorry to say, but in the American people, because we just let it happen over and over again. And I felt like any discussion about it at that point was a wasted effort. What these kids have done is at least given me a renewed hope that change can happen. And that's big, that's huge. I know that there are a lot of other people out there that felt the same way I did, and they just wanted to give up. And I think it's important to see these victories for, yes, what they are. It's not going far enough, but there's momentum going. And I'm really hoping that we keep fighting, that we don't get complacent and push for more change.
Yeah, and it starts with at least some change. Like I completely agree with you, Mark. I think that there does need to be more change, but it's just so encouraging to see any change, especially bringing up Las Vegas.
Yeah.
How many times have we, sat here or talked amongst ourselves just being so frustrated that there wasn't even a bill, and this was overwhelmingly passed by the General Assembly. That I have to take as encouraging, because so much of this has been discouraging, just to see, all the low blows that have been thrown against these kids that have sparked this movement. And this is something that we can celebrate. This is something that is encouraging. This is building on that momentum, and hopefully there will be more that we can also celebrate.
Exactly. Now, these measures are set to go to the state Senate, where they're expected to pass. And as we mentioned, the governor is likely and willing to sign this legislation into law. All right, moving forward to some other news. New reports indicate that Michigan University paid a firm to dig up dirt on some of the victims who had accused Larry Nassar of sexual misconduct. The report indicates that public relations firm Weber Shandwick billed Michigan State University for more than $500,000 for January as it tracked social media activities surrounding the case of convicted physician Larry Nassar that often included the accounts of his sexual assault victims and their families. Now, what this report also found was, in addition to tracking the social media activity of Nassar's victims and family, the firm tracked those of journalists, celebrities, and politicians. They had billed the university January of this year for more than $500,000. Previously, the university itself was doing their own digging. But as these investigations move forward into MSU's role in all of this, we're finding some pretty devastating new information. The former dean of MSU was recently arrested, a story that we reported on last week. And the special prosecutor investigating this case gave a press conference and explained why. Take a look.
And the end result of that is that we're here today having charged former Dean William Strample with a number of charges. The 4 charges that I would anticipate he's going to be arraigned on this afternoon are count 1, misconduct in office, which is a 5-year felony. The second count is criminal sexual conduct in the 4th degree, which is a 2-year high misdemeanor, and 2 counts of willful neglect of duty, which are 1-year misdemeanors. But I want to highlight paragraphs 28 and 29 of the probable cause affidavit, because I think they summarize the basis of the misconduct charge against former Dean Strample. In paragraph 28, as dean of the college, Strample used his office to harass, discriminate, demean, sexually proposition, and sexually assault female students in violation of his statutory duty as a public officer. In paragraph 29, as dean of the college, Strample abused the authority of his public office through threats and manipulation to solicit, receive, possess pornographic images of women who appear to be MSU students in violation of his statutory duty as a public officer.
So we have the former dean who was being investigated to see whether or not he knew that Larry Nassar was abusing these female athletes, arrested because that investigation turned up evidence that he was possibly guilty of sexual misconduct of his own. And then now we're finding through a report that was done by USA Today that the university itself had hired a firm to essentially track the social media activity of the victims and also the journalists reporting on these stories.
These big institutions like Michigan State University, like the Catholic Church, like Penn State during the Jerry Sandusky situation, they close ranks to protect the institution. And you see that here also. You know, in the cases that I've mentioned, where you look at Penn State, you look at the Catholic Church, they don't call the cops, they view it as an internal matter. Same thing is true at Penn State. They didn't alert anyone to what was going on at Sandusky, and they knew what was happening there. They tried to handle it as an internal matter. And here, too, you see Michigan State hiring these outside firms to try to dig up and protect the institution frankly, from falling apart. I mean, you know, you get to a point where the reputation of the institution is so muddied that nobody wants anything to do with it. And so there's so much of that going on here. It's heinous because of what was happening there. But it's so typical of the institution to close ranks to try to protect itself.
It's so nauseating, too. Yeah. It's just absolutely disgusting. And you do see that. You do see them closing ranks. And it just makes you think honestly about the humanity there. You know, who are you protecting? I mean, you look at some of the figures, how much they were paying out to this PR firm, or what was?
Yeah, it's a PR firm.
I mean, think about that. Think about what are you protecting? You want a PR from the victims and their families of a sexual predator?
I mean, it would be much better to come forward and say, as a university, instead of trying to cover things up and hide things from the public, which, by the way, all things dark come to light.
Yes.
It'd be way better to come forward and say, this was happening. We are taking action. These people are being outed, reported to the authorities. You know, we are going to change X, Y, and Z in order to prevent this from happening in the future. Be proactive. Do what's necessary to prevent it from happening in the future instead of being so concerned about your brand and your reputation. Your reputation is destroyed, and it was further destroyed by the fact that you're trying to cover things up by hiring a PR firm to track these victims online.
Yeah, not only were they not proactive, Anna, they were reactive, and they went back into their corners trying to protect. You know, you have to ask yourself, what did you really think you were protecting here? And you just must have absolutely lost sight of what is important. I'm just very grateful that everything in the darkness will come to the light, and there has been this moment of reckoning, because it's really, I'm sure you guys covered this here, just hearing the accounts of these victims that came forward and were able to speak out. It's really hard not to swear right now.
Right, how do you listen to that testimony? Right. There were, upward of 120 women who came forward and testified during Nassar's trial. Mm-hmm. How do you listen to that testimony and then decide, oh, the real victims are, could be us, so let's go ahead and cover up, hire the necessary people to protect our name, and our reputation? It's not gonna work, first of all. And secondly, have a little bit of empathy for those victims and take the appropriate measures to prevent this from happening in the future.
Yeah, they should have taken a real aggressive approach to it, and instead they dropped back, they closed ranks, they hired a PR firm, they wanted to protect the brand, and it's the completely wrong thing to do. And yes, you are gonna take a big ding because of something that was going on, a heinous thing that was going on in your program, but at least the way you handle it will be an aggressive, righteous way to make things right. And yet, that's not what happened.
Exactly. We got to take a quick break. Let's do that. But in the meantime, you can tweet to us using the hashtag TYTLive or leave a comment in YouTube Super Chat. We will read your comments when we return.
This was my house where I raised my kids. This is where Destiny lived, the little girl that had cancer. There's a person in that house that has cancer. This lady had cancer, and our leadership's not hearing us. They're in bed with industries. If another country come in here, blew up our mountains and poisoned our water, we go to war.
My name's Paula Jean. I am a coal miner's daughter running for the U.S. Senate, and I am mad as hell.
New York isn't Democrat versus Republican. New York is establishment versus whatever poor stray cat thinks you can stand up against them.
When someone looks at me, the bias would be to not take me seriously until I open my mouth.
I am proud to be an American, but we have to rise to that promise.
What I learned through Ferguson was you don't have to have a name, you don't have to have the money. The problems that we have in our district are problems that we ourselves can fix.
I myself can de-escalate a person with a gun. And I'm not a police officer, so I wonder how come they can't do it.
When you're running for office and you're not a typical candidate, you have to remember your why. There's 30,000 people a year dying because they don't have health care. This is a commodity. My daughter's life wasn't.
We have never seen this at this scale in American history. We have slates and legions of candidates that have rejected corporate funds.
The Bronx does not need to be the poorest county in the USA.
If change is going to happen in St. Louis, we have to believe that you are that change.
We work harder in these races just because we're women. We're not rich white dudes in suits.
We're in this together, girl.
But politics is about power. The system fights to protect itself.
We're doing something very controversial. We're daring to force a primary.
Nobody owns you yet. You don't owe anybody anything yet. This is no joke, y'all. They're gonna come after you.
My mom, if she's afraid. I've had my life threatened.
People try to use the fact that I'm a black woman to hold me back. I'm able to stomp through some doors that other people are afraid to.
I'm not going to allow my daughter to have died for nothing.
I just think they underestimate us. At the end of the day, we're going to fight for each other. They need to know that. We're coming out of the belly of the beast kicking and screaming.
Welcome back. Some TYT Lives for you. Morning, my son tweets in, must really piss Ingram off that a 17-year-old student has more sway over and love of the public than her piss poor show. Oh, I love it. It's so good. I like saltiness. Okay. Sess writes, the powerful protect the powerful, even through criminal conduct. Absolutely. Yeah. And just another name tweets in and writes, every journey starts with the first step and continues with the second and then third. And that's, I'm guessing, a response to Vermont's.
Vermont, yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, you got to start somewhere.
Absolutely. All right, let's move forward. The next story is disturbing to say the least, but we got to talk about it. The defense attorney for the mass shooter in Parkland, Florida, is confirming reports that he has received a large volume of fan mail, in addition to sexually explicit images and other notes from women and girls who find him attractive. So let's go to that. The suspect in the Florida high school shooting that killed 17 is getting letters of support in jail, including fan mail and pictures of scantily clad women, in addition to hundreds of dollars in contributions to his commissary account. The South Florida Sun Sentinel obtained copies of these letters, including one from a woman who called the shooter beautiful and others with suggestive photos. To give you an example of one of these letters, by the way, they're not letting him see these letters, thankfully. One of the letters says, I'm an 18-year-old. I'm a senior in high school. When I saw your picture on the television, something attracted me to you. Your eyes are beautiful and the freckles on your face make you so handsome. What is going on?
This isn't a new phenomenon at all.
I know, it's not new, but apparently the attorney who's representing him, the public the public defender who is representing him, said that they've experienced this before, but not to this extent, not with this volume, and that's.
I think social media, I mean, I hate to always hang on social media, but I do think this age of so many different, tributaries fitting into that river of communication that you can get to that guy, I think these days there's just more of it because, sort of as Grace says, it's not new. The number of crazies out there who just want a piece of his weird fame, and that's the disturbing thing about it, that these guys who do this crap, and it's overwhelmingly guys, I mean men. So I say guys deliberately. The guys who are involved in these massacres and in these horrible acts, they're achieving I know it's an infamy, but it's also a fame. It is, their pictures are plastered everywhere. Their manifesto that's found on Facebook is then read. You feel like you get to know them in this awful way. And that creates an aura around them. And that aura is something that people respond to. And in this, now I go back to the technology, in this day and age, if I can use that phrase, when you can get your message in so many different ways out to so many different places, it just creates an even bigger aura around this guy. So I see that as the phenomenon as it plays out in this culture.
Yeah, it's like this sinister cloud, and that people get sucked into it for twisted reasons. And it's actually, I would say that I don't think it has that much to do with social media, although we were more aware of it. I think we have a heightened awareness because through a number of serial killers that we've talked about on Murder with Friends, there will be people that will show up to their trial supporters, that are fully fledged supporters that want to, they get married behind bars and all this stuff happens. When we covered Columbine, I was doing research for that, and I remember finding that there are active Tumblr sites, fan sites for those shooters, those murderers. And so I'm not surprised by this, but I think that it sounds like his public defender is handling it in a responsible way. I feel weird about even kind of talking about it, for it to be a main news story, because I'm really hesitant for this person, for the shooter, to get wind of this. I don't want that. I don't want there to be any validation of that sort.
I forgot that Grace is an expert on murder and these people who are involved in it. I mean, her show, Murder with Friends, does talk about a lot of this stuff, so she is familiar with it. I mean, it's kind of a grim thing.
It is, and it kind of all, again, like it is like that aura, it all kind of comes with this like gross territory, and there are people that will become fans.
So, okay, and I don't mean to put you on the spot because you weren't expecting me to ask you these questions, but the people who end up fantasizing about these mass murderers and these terrible people, I mean, are they mentally sound? Are they normal, everyday people, or are in covering these stories and these mass murderers, the admirers, like, are they just normal, average women who just?
It can be sometimes. I mean, I think it sort of varies case by case. There's usually some identifying factor within one of these figures, within the infamy that I think they're sort of drawn in by that they connect with. And sometimes it's people that you're like, oh, that's kind of a crazy, that whatever that means. That's someone that would have this deviant interest. But then a lot of times you'll just have people, and I think men and women alike, that out of nowhere align themselves with a murderer, and maybe it's not something that they would have ever expected, and maybe there's more research on it off the top, I can't think of anything, but it's a variety of people that will be drawn in. I just think it comes down to how you handle that when you do have this mass murder behind bars, making sure that he is not aware that he is growing a fan base, because I think that's where it gets really dicey, and that's where you sort of get into sort of like the Mansonisms and how he was able to cultivate a following even behind bars.
Right. And people are donating their money toward his commissary.
That's right.
Up to $800 according to his public defender. So that's what's going on, but luckily, it is being handled responsibly, and it doesn't seem as though he is getting any type of access to this fan mail or this money. All right, moving forward, I want to end on some good news, because there is some positive news, some positive developments when it comes to cancer and cancer research. Researchers from Stanford University looked into a possible cancer vaccine, and through their clinical trials on mice found that the vaccine is incredibly effective, and they're planning on testing the vaccine on humans very soon. Now, the treatment stimulates the body's immune system to attack cancer cells. In studies in mice with various cancers, including lymphoma, breast cancer, and colon cancer, the treatment eliminated cancer tumors in 87 out of 90 mice, even when the tumors had spread to other parts of the body. Now, the word vaccine is being used by the researchers here, but this treatment works differently from traditional vaccines. Now, traditionally, vaccines prevent diseases. In this case, the cancer already exists. However, the treatment is injected into the tumor, and it strengthens the immune system to help the body fight the cancer, and not only that tumor, but all other tumors that have spread to the rest of that individual's body. So researchers from Stanford will test the therapy in about 35 people with lymphoma by the end of the year. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of the science and how this treatment works. The treatment contains a combination of 2 agents that stimulate T cells, a type of immune cell to attack cancer. Normally, the body's T cells recognize cancer cells as abnormal and will infiltrate and attack them. But as a tumor grows, it suppresses the activity of the T cells so that these cells can no longer keep the cancer at bay. But this treatment would essentially empower those T cells to keep fighting. Researchers inject the vaccine directly into the tumor. The 2 agents in the treatment work synergistically in attacking the T cells. Because these T cells were already inside the tumors, they have essentially been pre-screened by the body to recognize cancer-specific proteins. And so, again, it has been rather successful in these trials involving mice. But there have been other trials using other treatments that have been successful with mice, but it didn't transfer to humans. So hopefully this will be successful in trials involving humans, but we'll see.
It's kind of early, but it is still, it's fine to be optimistic. It's always good to be optimistic about this. What I think is interesting is that a vaccine I usually think of as preventative, and this is a little bit more reactionary, which is fine, but it's just interesting to see how we're developing the technology and the medicinal science to deal with cancer. And it's probably not going to be the way that I would have expected. I sort of thought that within my lifetime, we would maybe have some sort of a vaccine or something. And perhaps if this goes through, then you would sort of have to contract cancer first and then you can deal with it. So we'll see how this rolls out.
There's so many different kinds of cancers, and it's happening on a cellular level, and cells begin to misfire. And so it involves a lot of different biological systems. So I think that's one of the reasons it's hard to come up with the cure for cancer in any of our lifetime. I've said it before, I don't approve of the use of animals in any of these experiments. It's an awful thing. These animals suffer and they're tortured and then they're destroyed, which means killed at the end of this. And then, to what Anna says, it's not an accurate predictor of what will happen with people. The only way you can actually do this is with double-blind studies with human beings, because in overwhelming cases, it's not a predictor. It doesn't show the indication. Again, I don't mean to rain on the parade. This might be a great drug, but the only way we'll know is the next step, as Anna says, when they do the double-blind study in humans with tumors. So it hopefully is good news, and as you say, might be the beginning of a real process of treating cancer. We certainly come up with different ways to treat it in our lifetime, right?
It's totally different. My fiance's grandmother and my fiance's mother both had breast cancer, and it's interesting. So that's obviously something in their gene pool, and the treatments that they went through just generationally have improved vastly. And so there's a lot to be encouraged about, but obviously we're still a ways away.
So I wanted to jump in on what Mark was saying, because there was a story recently that unfortunately we didn't get to on the show regarding how members of the right-wing lawmakers were pushing for legislation that would allow people with cancer and other illnesses to opt in to treatments that haven't been approved by the FDA yet. So they would be trial type situations. And I don't know why it is, but members of the left aren't necessarily in favor of that. And I think part of the reason why these clinical trials begin with mice is because of some of those regulatory restrictions. I firmly believe that as humans, we should have complete say over our own bodies and what we do to our own bodies, as long as we're not harming anyone else. And if someone has a terminal illness or something as serious as cancer, I think he or she should have the ability to make a decision as to whether or not they're involved in certain trials or certain treatments that haven't been approved by the FDA yet. Now, with that said, there has already been considerable advancements in cancer treatments in other countries, something that isn't talked about a lot here in the United States. Let's keep it real. In fact, there has been some development in treating lung cancer in Cuba. And there have been numerous reports about this, but I just wanted to show you this quick video to give you a little more insight into this treatment. Take a look.
Simovax EGF is a Cuban-developed drug aimed at preventing the recurrence of the disease. Gomez is now back at work, and once a month she returns to the hospital for a series of intramuscular injections.
Me siento bien, he hasta engordado más.
I feel good. I've even gained some weight. I've been using the vaccine for 2 years and 4 months now, and so far I feel really good.
Me he sentido de lo mejor.
Patients still have to complete a course of chemo or radiotherapy before moving on to the vaccine. There are other lung cancer fighting drugs which work by attacking the cancer cells. What's different about the vaccine is that it helps the body generate its own immune system in a way that starves the cancer and stops it from growing.
It has revolutionized lung cancer treatment in our country. It's a new therapeutic weapon for treating the disease. Patients are responding well and surviving for longer than those not being treated with it.
So, there again has been some advancements in Cuba, and for all of the fear-mongering that you hear in the United States regarding Cuba and how Cubans are living, they're still doing an incredible job when it comes to preventative health care. And apparently they've shown some improvement when it comes to treating diseases such as cancer as well. So.
I can't help but be struck that as we talk about all these different cancer cures, and there are breakthroughs and there are great signs, that never talked about is the cause of cancer. We don't talk enough. Actually, we do talk a bit about it on TYT. But these pollutants that we referred to, particularly in hour one, the toxification of the air, the water, the land, and of course the cancer rates are growing. And the treatments have to grow with them. But if we could have a little more conversation in this country about the causes of the cancer, instead of, hey, different ways to treat the tumor. Hey, my aunt just got cancer. Right, because we're swimming, we're bathing in these carcinogens every day. And it's just a shame that there isn't more talk about those things in our environment that are producing these conditions.
Absolutely.
And also treatments in other countries. I think that's really important to point out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing that the US could certainly improve upon is learning from what other countries are doing right. And oftentimes that has to do with policy, right? I mean, we very rarely look at things like health policy, healthcare policy in other countries, and learn from what they're doing right. In fact, we'll look at countries that are doing things right and automatically smear it, as our politicians do with universal health care in places like Canada, for instance. And it's because of the corporate interests that don't want us to have a better system in place. But what we saw in Cuba with that treatment for lung cancer is kind of similar to what researchers are now looking into here in the United States. Ways to strengthen and improve the human immune system so it can kind of fight off that cancer and keep people living longer lives. Yeah,
increasingly there's evidence that it's a breakdown in the immune system that allows this cancer to grow and then achieve a kind of a critical mass of momentum so that it begins to be, the tumors then begin to take down our bodies. Yeah, and just to your point and my point about pesticides and those things in the environment, the Europeans are much tougher on it than we are. In this country, we're much looser about pesticides and lifting regulations on them. So again, and these things, there is a direct relationship with these things in the environment and cancer. So.
Absolutely. All right, we are about to wrap up the show, but I wanted to read a few TYT Lives and respond to them before we do so. Jess, yep, it's me, tweets in and says, by the way, use the hashtag TYT Live to tweet to us in case you want to share your comments and haven't been able to. Manson, going back to the story about admirers of mass killers and stuff like that. Manson had hundreds of so-called fans. Can't even imagine what would have happened if social media was around during that time.
Oh gosh, that's a very daunting thought.
Yeah. Mark of the Beast writes in, forget not letting the shooter see those letters, send them to the authorities to do a wellness check. So when I was researching for that story, I was very curious to see what people were commenting in various articles written about it. And most people were furious and wanted to take some sort of retaliation against the admirers. I don't want to retaliate, but I do think that there should be a discussion about why they're attracted to someone who murdered 17 people, innocent people. We talk about healthcare and mental health care a lot when it comes to mass shootings. Yeah, healthcare is something we should probably focus on. Anyway, Belinda says, I smell a new topic for Murder with Friends season 3. Lovers of murderers. Grace, before we end, how can the audience watch Murder with Friends?
Head on over to the Pop Trigger channel and just type in Murder with Friends, and we did a season finale episode on Ted Bundy, so be sure to check that out because I think we did we had a good discussion about it. There's a lot to get into with him.
It just sounded funny. We had a season finale on Ted Bundy.
We did, we did.
All right, guys, Anna Kasparian, Grace Baldridge, Mark Thompson with you. Thank you for watching. We'll see you soon.
music makes my heart race. I love it. Mark Thompson here filling in on Rebel headquarters for Cenk, who is away this week. Great show ahead. Two real activists, and you'll have a chance to meet both of them and hear about what they're doing. Before I get to that, I have exciting news out of Kansas's 3rd district. You know, we're almost at $50,000 raised for Brent Welder, and this is probably the most important window of fundraising for his campaign coming up in the next 72 hours, because he can break the record for the biggest fundraising quarter in the history of the district, and that will then make him eligible for all kinds of outside support and finances. But here's the real news out of this race. Today, Real Clear Politics changed that Kansas 3rd district rating from leans Republican to toss-up. So those of you who have leaned into this race, your leaning is working, and we encourage you to make a contribution. Again, he's on the verge of breaking a record, and if Brent can break the record, it would just be the most exciting thing, and he's $11,000 away from doing that. So you can make a contribution online, and you can do it. I think if we don't have it up here, look, here's the thermometer, and the thermometer is over 45,000 for his campaign, raised by the TYT Army. And then that's a really impressive mark, especially when you look at how close it is to 50,000. So help Brent break this record. You can contribute at tytkansas.com. Good luck, Brent. We're watching that race, and we'll continue to show you some love. Rio Tazwell is with us, and Rio is part of an organization that has been around for a while. He's an advocate. He's a social entrepreneur. He has 10 years' experience in working to advance social and political equality. And Rio, first of all, welcome to the show. And People for the American Way, I think, has been around since the 80s, hasn't it?
That's right. Yeah, great to be joining you, Mark. Thanks for having me. Yeah, People for has been around since the early 80s, coming up on 40 years now, actually.
I want to say, was Norman Lear who started it, or was it one of the producers, maybe in conjunction with others, but was Norman Lear involved, the producer?
That is correct. The legendary Norman Lear is the founder, and he's actually still an active member of our board. So,
yeah, which is just incredible. I mean, the guy's got to be over 90 years old, I would think.
He is. Yeah, and he's still going strong.
Tell us what People for the American Way does, what your concerns are generally, and then how they are focused, and what's the work that you're really is a front and center issue for you now.
Sure, yeah. So People for the American Way is a multi-issue advocacy organization. We're progressive. We're working on a lot of issues of social and political equality, everything from racial justice to gender justice, immigrant rights, LGBT rights. I manage our good government work, so we're doing a lot of stuff in the democracy space, fighting the influence of money in politics in particular, standing up for people's right to vote, pushing back against the corporate takeover of our democracy, lobbying reform, ethics, gerrymandering, redistricting, you name it. We're kind of involved in the whole range of systemic democracy reforms, including the enormous situation that we see now with potential collusion of the Trump administration and Russia, potential obstruction of justice, and then myriad financial crimes that the president may be guilty of. So we're big coalition partners. We don't usually do things all on our own, so we work very closely with a wide range of allies to leverage our membership. We have over 1 million members all across the country to engage in different types of advocacy and activism.
So People for the American Way, with that laundry list of overwhelming issues that face this country, and honestly, some of those battles we feel as though we're losing right now. Where are we gaining ground, and where are we losing ground?
Well, I think progressives in general are gaining ground in the sense that we're feeling really fired up and ready for the midterms. I think people are really becoming aware that without active involvement and participation on the part of all of us, that people that really don't have our best interests in mind or have a really different worldview than us are going to show up and make our decisions for us. And they're going to get people elected into power that are going to pass laws that really go against everything that we believe. So I think generally we're winning in that progressives are ready to really build on this momentum and this movement and take it to the ballot box. So I think we're setting ourselves up hopefully for a big wave in 2018 and beyond. I mean, as far as where we're losing, I mean, take your pick. There's so many issues that we're losing on right now. I mean, every different agency, is suffering its own different types of conflicts of interest. We're going in the wrong direction on so many different fronts, whether it's inequality with the recent tax bill, attacks on people's health care, the environment pulling out of the climate accords. The laundry list is so long that it's hard to just pick one. So we're really trying to put out a lot of fires at once as far as our advocacy work. But I do see a lot of potential in the next few months as far as really mobilizing progressives and hopefully having some electoral wins.
When you talk about mobilizing progressives and you talk about getting people out, what are the subjects that people rally around the most? I mean, all of what you've said is true, right? We've seen an infiltration of government by a corporate structure that is rewriting legislation and is defiling the government, is destroying what little is left of the democracy that we had. But what are the things that you find rally people? Because I know you go and you speak and you meet and you get people out in a grassroots way. What are the things that energize the progressive base?
Absolutely. So I think one of the winning issues for progressives is the issue of money in politics. And it's not just for progressives either. In fact, people across the political spectrum from the right and the left and the middle all agree that there's too much money in politics and that we need to basically pass reforms to give people an equal say in our democracy. So I feel like that is really an area in which we need to do more of as far as messaging to the public. It's not something that just rallies up our base. It really appeals to people across the board. And the good news is that money in politics is in fact a solvable problem. It's not some existential crisis. While it might feel like that in some ways, there actually are tangible reforms that we can pass. Big, long-term, ambitious reforms like amending the Constitution to overturn Citizens United, and then also more, short-term achievable reforms like increasing transparency and disclosure of political spending, enacting systems of publicly funded elections that give grassroots candidates the opportunity to effectively fundraise and mount a competitive campaign without courting high-dollar corporate donors.
Well, you know how we feel about all of that at TYT. The constitutional amendment on down is very much to the core of what we believe in here at TYT. But you also mentioned something which is interesting, that you said these issues have appealed to those who maybe weren't on board, that you wouldn't consider part of the progressive movement prior. Have you seen more support and people more receptive to showing support to yours and other organizations that you connect with than in the past?
Yeah, I think so. I think in part we have to look back at what happened in 2016 and realize that Donald Trump effectively owned this issue. He said he was going to drain the swamp. I think he did a pretty effective job of messaging this in a very simplistic way that really pulled on people's heartstrings and pulled on people's emotions. And he was able to basically manipulate the issue to his own gain. And I think progressives need to kind of learn from that and realize that we need to talk about this in really simplistic ways, and if we do that, then I think we'll start to see a lot of people that maybe don't agree with us on everything as far as like social issues come to our side as far as fighting for a democracy that works for all of us. So I do think it's a work in progress, but I think that this ultimately will be the winning issue that gets progressives into power.
I love that you said this because it's been a pet peeve of mine. I feel the right has messaged better than the left has. The progressive movement has been swept under by some fast rhetoric from a charismatic guy, and Donald Trump is that. There's a reason that everybody has this weird attraction to this guy, and they show his empty podium in the run-up to the general election, as opposed to a Bernie Sanders rally, which has 20,000 people in the seats. So the messaging that we have to do is a big part of our future. I really like to hear you talking about that.
Absolutely, and it's so exciting to see young people in particular realizing that this is the issue of all issues. And I think Bernie Sanders did a phenomenal job of really bringing it into the cultural sphere as far as people talking about the millionaires and the billionaires and overturning Citizens United, and then the importance of addressing money in politics. I think that's really just a start. We need more politicians and candidates running on this issue in particular. And we just need more people out there talking about it as advocates, as activists, as individuals, as members of the media. And I think that's something that the mainstream media could really be doing much more of. We love to talk about these sensational issues that get the headlines, but there's not a lot of coverage that drills a little bit deeper and looks at the systemic problems that really cause all of the ills of this country and really the world. But I do think that we are starting to see a shift as far as people's awareness. I mean, even just to give a really recent example with the Parkland shooting, these kids from Stoneman Douglas High School are doing an amazing job of articulating the connection between the NRA and campaign finance, and the Republican Party for the most part that's beholden to the NRA and their campaign donations, and they're all over the mainstream media on cable TV talking about it. And I feel like that's just the start of what we'll see happening for issues of all kinds, not just gun violence.
It has to be laid bare. Great to meet you via Skype. Rio Tazewell, good luck. People for the American Way, if you're interested in more information and supporting them, pfaw.org is the website, and donation at tinyurl.com/donate. OPFAW. I don't know. I would just go to pfw.org, but is that what it is? pfw.org, right?
Yep, pfaw.org.
pfw.org.
Exactly.
And there's all right. Rio, pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise. Thanks for having me. Appreciate
Good luck.
it. Thanks.
Rio Tazewell, People for the American Way. back to Rebel Headquarters. Mark Thompson here for Cenk. You've seen our next guest's work here on TYT. We're running pieces of her documentary in some of the breaks. Rachel Lears is a great documentarian, has done some really powerful documentaries in the past. And in fact, she did a documentary called The Hand That Feeds that was a dramatic story about undocumented immigrant workers organizing at a deli in New York City, and it was really widely acclaimed. So Rachel joins us now. She'll talk about her latest work, and that's the one I'm talking about that you've seen running in the breaks here at TYT. Rachel, welcome to Rebel Headquarters.
Hi, Mark. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
So Rachel, tell everybody about Knock Down the House and how it focuses on a very important group of people.
Yeah, so Knock Down the House follows 4 insurgent congressional campaigns around the country for Justice Democrats candidates that your viewers might be familiar with. None of them has any experience holding political office, but they've all experienced deep personal stories of injustice that are really driving them to confront political machines in 4 different parts of the country.
Yeah, can you share with us some of those stories? Because they really are compelling. I mean, these people have been pressed into politics by being touched personally by different events.
Yeah, absolutely. So in New York, I'm based in New York, and here we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is, she comes from a background of education and nonprofits and actually has degrees in economics and international relations. But since the financial crisis, she had been working in restaurants to make ends meet to help save her family's home from foreclosure. So she really knows on a firsthand level just the struggles that so many Americans go through on a day-to-day basis to keep their families in good shape. In Nevada, we have Amy Villela, who lost her daughter, her adult daughter, 2 years ago because she went to the hospital, to the ER, with an undiagnosed blood clot and was actually refused treatment because she didn't have insurance at the time.
And it was a preventable medical condition. In other words, she could have easily been treated and been fine and been live today.
Absolutely. It is just one of the most horrendous stories that you can imagine. It was a completely preventable medical condition that could have been diagnosed. So Amy became, she took her grief and learned how to turn it into a drive for positive change. And she became an activist for Medicare for All. And when she found out that her congressman, Reuben Kihuen, would not support Medicare for All, she decided to run a primary against him. And then this past December, he actually stepped down from the race due to allegations of sexual harassment. So her seat is actually an open primary. And then, so the third candidate we're following is Paula Jean Swearengin in West Virginia, who
is coal country.
Yes, indeed.
And she has personal experience with coal.
Yes, she does. She's lost numerous family members and neighbors and friends to illnesses caused by pollution in the coal and fossil fuel industries. And she really wants to stress the false choice between jobs and the environment and health and safety. She really believes that West Virginians deserve all of the above. So she's fighting that fight in West Virginia. And we also have Cori Bush, a frontline Ferguson activist from St. Louis, who is a nurse and a pastor and a mother as well. And she rounds out the mini slate that we're following for the film.
Yeah, and she responded to the Michael Brown shooting as protests came into her neighborhood. And again, these people all sort of have firsthand experience with these different issues. I want to go back to Paula Jean. I know Cenk's talked about Paula Jean on the show before. This is the coal miner's daughter who's so active in coal country. Well, you follow all of these people, so we get a chance to see them interact with the voters. What is the reaction in coal country to someone who is sharing a personal story that isn't too flattering to the coal industry?
Well, I think it's complicated, and Paula Jean certainly has a ton of experience talking to people all over the state. She's been traveling West Virginia tirelessly for almost a year now, talking to people from across the political spectrum. And I know that she finds that a lot of folks are receptive, not just to her message about the coal industry in particular, but really, what she's fighting for a range of policies that would benefit working people to a great degree. So she is also fighting for Medicare for all. She came out in support of the West Virginia teachers strike a number of weeks ago and was the only candidate to spend significant time on the picket line with the teachers. So I know that a lot of them were very, very excited to see her there. And I think that it's, she has to continue taking this message around the state and really building up a grassroots campaign to win there, just like each of the candidates do. These are people-powered campaigns, and it's really going to depend on the ground organizing work. These are truly working class messages. They're authentic messages. They're not, I care about the middle class, and then the guy hops into some SUV and then drives back to his multi-million-dollar home, and that's it. These are real working class people that you feature in your documentary. Now, tell me about the documentary filmmaking process, because you have to follow these candidates, and it's really an interesting follow on one level, but it's also time-consuming, and I'm sure it consumes a lot of money. How are you funded, and is it a grassroots effort to keep funding it, and where does the project stand? Fill us in on that. Thanks. Well, we are actually, like the campaigns that we're following, this is a people-powered production. We've been crowdfunding on Kickstarter for the month of March. We actually have about 24 hours left in the campaign. So that ends tomorrow night, Friday night at 8 p.m. We've got a matching fund in effect. And so this is folks' last chance to pre-order the film and get a lot of other special rewards that are connected to the story and the topics. Okay, so stop right there. So to do that, people can do what? Yes, so you go to knockdownthehouse.com, and that will redirect you to our Kickstarter page. You can find all the information there. Cool. Didn't mean to interrupt. I just want to make sure we have the URL up there. Yeah, knockdownthehouse.com. So that's where you can get all the information, both on the movie and on how to support the movie. So go ahead, Rachel. Sorry. Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity to share that. So the filmmaking process, it's the biggest challenge to this project is the fact that it's taking place simultaneously in several locations around the country. So we're in the process of expanding our team with additional collaborators to help cover the story when our team can't be there. We are going to be spending several weeks in advance of each primary in each of the locations, and I'm in touch frequently with all of the campaigns, just keeping track of what's going on. But we are independent documentary filmmakers. That means that our funding comes through a variety of sources, through crowdfunding, through grants. In this case, we're focusing on the crowdfunding and individual donors right now. The typical film industry forms of support, such as grants and investment in television co-productions, do take a long time to come into fruition. So we're in the process of working on those, and meanwhile, we've just got to cover the story. Well, your last film, The Hand That Feeds, I mentioned it before we met you. It was picked up by PBS, I think. Didn't they showed it on public television, I believe, right? So. Correct. So we were part of a series on PBS's affiliated world channel called America Reframed, which is a series featuring independent documentaries on a variety of topics focusing on the United States. And we were lucky enough to be nominated for an Emmy last year for that production. That's terrific. Look, can't recommend it enough. Knockdownthehouse.com. When I say I can't recommend it enough, I mean, what I've seen looks compelling, interesting, and important. And all those things mean that we should support you. So knockdownthehouse.com. Thank you, Rachel Lears. I could talk to you, and I have a bunch more questions. Until the next time, thanks so much for being with us. Thank you so much as well. It's great to talk to you. Take care.
That's Rachel Lear's documentary filmmaker. And again, you'll see more of the highlights of her film here at TYT, because we run them during the breaks, and we should show her all the love that we possibly can. Is that it, guys? Now I just wrap up? All right. Thank you for joining. Cenk is back next week. Always fun to be at TYT. Until next time, bye-bye.